Hi, this is Ruth Theresa with One Inspiring Woman, and today we're talking about how to set boundaries with people. That's right, today we're talking about boundaries, and a lot of times people really don't understand boundaries. And I think it's because they kind of almost expect it to be an impenetrable wall that everybody has the same boundaries. And it's not actually the way it is, because sometimes when we have someone who's really close to us, like a best friend, we're going to kind of give them a little bit more latitude with some stuff, kind of like the boundary's not going to be as far out as it would be with someone who's brand new in your life or someone that you don't trust in your life. So it's kind of like everybody has like their own boundary, and where do those boundaries kind of line up with what you require or desire from that person is really important to kind of understand, because that's going to tell you where to put that boundary for that person. Because a lot of times people, when they first meet someone, they don't really have a lot of boundaries. They're just like, I'm just like want to get to know them and how are things happening and that sort of thing. So that's okay, I guess, in some ways. But it's one of those, and then later on when you set boundaries and they're like, okay, now this is your boundary for me. They're kind of like, the person's like, oh my gosh, wait. This is not the boundary I had before. And they start kind of freaking out or kind of overdoing things, or kind of like, what did I do to make you mad or whatever else? And it's like, no, this is where your boundary goes when you're new. And so for myself, I have learned that when I've put boundaries up to begin with, like, we're just newly friends, so let's not talk about that yet until we get to know each other a little bit better. And that helps me and them kind of understand where my limits are, where my boundaries are with people, and maintaining healthy ones. And then as we get to know each other, I will start kind of like letting down more and more boundaries and kind of letting them get it closer and closer to me. So that's an important thing to understand. And it's not necessarily a wall or a boundary is to kind of keep someone out. What it's really meant to do is to keep healthy boundaries so that people don't get their feelings hurt or get upset or angry or mad about something that you really don't want them to do, or kind of like, this is not where we go, this is not what we do. When we're together, we're doing this. So kind of one of the things that's kind of easy to do is kind of when you first get involved with someone is kind of setting up some healthy boundaries. And that's kind of like ahead of time before you meet new people, kind of like, what are my boundaries? Do I have a loose boundary in this area, or do I have an open boundary in this area? Do I have like a solid, tight, like, oh my gosh, steel wall boundary in this area? And that's a great way to kind of put people in different categories. It's sometimes it can be difficult to say no to other people, but when it's a boundary, it really kind of helps saying it that way. My boundary is I don't get in a car with someone I just met. So I can follow you to the location, or you can follow me to the location, or you can text me the address and I'll drive there myself. But that's for later on when we get closer. And seeking kind of like that information right away, like letting people know, like, this is my boundary, we're not going past this at a certain point. And that makes things a lot easier and a lot more clear to begin with. And kind of it kind of gives you good expectations about the relationship, but it also can give them really great expectations of where this relationship can go. Because a lot of times it's like, oh, I'm always going to be on the boundaries. It's like, no, this is where my boundary is when I meet someone new. Once I get to know them, that boundary kind of shifts and changes. And as we get to know each other in our friendship, this will also shift and change for both of us. And so it kind of really allows them, hopefully, a chance to kind of set some healthier boundaries for them. But it also kind of helps myself kind of setting healthy boundaries. One of my kind of quirky ones are kind of like not sharing too much personal information. And I may tell you the name of my kids or whatever else, but I'm not going to tell you where they live. I'm not going to tell you too much information or where they work or anything like that. Understanding that a person wants to communicate with me and wants to get to know me, and I am giving them that information, but I'm just not giving them every aspect or every detail of it. I've even had someone ask me if my kids and I get along, and I was like, not an appropriate friend question. So when that we just met, and so I'm kind of like, let's kind of leave that off the table for right now. And they're like, oh, so that's telling me that you have a bad a relationship with your kids. And I was like, no, it really is letting you know that that's stepping over the boundary line. And as we get to know each other, you will find out about my kids, because I'll tell you things about my kids. And but them assuming that I already have a bad boundary with my kids, I was like, this may not be a friendship that lasts too, because they're pushing that line. And a lot of times I will tell people, if you are pushing the line with a boundary at the beginning, they're probably never going to really be okay with boundaries. That is something that's really important to understand. And there's boundaries in lots of different areas of your life. Like there's a physical boundary, like I don't like people standing right next to me. I reserve the right for my own privacy, like I said, for my kids and what they do. And then I don't want people to touch me or anything like that. I don't mean don't ever touch me, but I don't mind shaking hands, and I don't mind hugging people. But I've had people that will sit next to me and hold my hand for long periods of time, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of getting to the strange part. So I'll tell people okay, we've held hands and I appreciate that. Let me move my hands or something like that. And so they understand, I'll do it for a little bit, but, and kind of get them comfortable with my energy, before we move forward in this. The next one is kind of sexual. I don't put up with sexual comments, and I don't, even before my husband and I did not like people that touched me and it made me feel uncomfortable. I would tell you this is not comfortable. I don't like this. That's a very important aspect to understand, that there's a boundary with that. And I think it's really important, especially when you're dating. But I've had people in the last few years that will meet me and hold my hand a little too long, or they'll make a sexual comment in my presence, and I'm just like, no. And they'll look to me to kind of laugh about it, and I'm like, that was inappropriate. And there's no discussion or anything else. It's just inappropriate. There's an intellectual boundary that people have as well. And this is kind of about our own personal thoughts and beliefs. A lot of times when people come to me for a reading, they are coming to me for me to translate what Spirit says to them, or their people on the other side. And it's just kind of like me funneling that information through. But now if you're asking my personal opinion, that has its own separate boundary. I rarely talk to other people about certain ideas, thoughts that I have, beliefs that I have, because to me that's the personal side. That's not that's like asking a coworker if they're religious or not, or whatever else. So I'm kind of that's not a really good one for me until I really get to know you much better. And there's an emotional boundary as well, and this kind of is about people's personal feelings, and people might be comfortable sharing their feelings, or everything with people that they just met, or friends that they haven't known all that long. So it's one of those, they might withhold that a little bit more. I really am kind of really careful about talking about my emotional stuff with people. I will if it seems appropriate at the time, but only to the extent that I'm comfortable with it. And I very rarely really talk about my childhood with people, because that's my personal childhood. Now, if it relates to something they're saying, then yes, I will open up just for that bit, and then I will go back to that healthy boundary. And kind of the last boundary that really people need to be aware of is a financial boundary. Sometimes people will ask well, how much do you make a year? Or they'll ask, how much did you pay for that? And it's kind of like, that's a financial boundary. Now, if you're asking me how much I paid for my shirt, I don't mind telling you. If you ask me how much I paid for my truck, most likely I'm going to let you know. It's one of those, it's not that big a deal. But when people start asking, well, how much do you make a year? Or how much do you have in the bank or something like that? I'm kind of like, that's over the line for me. And so let's not do that one. That's kind of like, that's a personal one. So one of the things that's really important about boundaries is kind of setting those healthy boundaries for yourself, and kind of really reflecting, like, what is it going to be for you? Are you going to have a personal boundary for new people in your life, for people that you've already had in your life, or best friends? That's kind of like different boundaries, or with family. And so all of those are important to kind of really think about ahead of time, not waiting to kind of letting people know, like, afterwards, oh, you've gone over the line. Well, you didn't tell me there was a line here, so I didn't know there was a line, so tell me where it is. So it's kind of one of those interesting ones, is kind of setting those up correctly to begin with, and kind of setting your own healthy boundaries. And then when someone gets close to them, say, that's one of my personal boundaries, or that's one of my boundaries, to not talk about this at this time, and leaving it at that. It's kind of an important one when you are really kind of setting healthy boundaries for other people in your life. Can be very, very good to set healthy boundaries. And it may seem overwhelming, but it's one of those, it's kind of really the best part of, like, setting those healthy boundaries, so people are not just jumping all over things, or you're kind of like, wait, you're jumping on my boundary now. And they're like, oh, I didn't even know there was a boundary there. So letting them know. That's kind of the first one, is kind of like setting them early and letting people know kind of what your boundaries are. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I just met you, my boundaries are this. It can be setting boundaries from the very beginning. Lets everybody understand. There's no confusion, there's no frustration, there's no blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like, it can be easier. And then you can also let them know, as we get to know each other, my boundaries will shift and change, and I'll let you know about those as well. Being consistent with your boundaries are really important, kind of letting people know that your boundaries change over time. But this is my boundary for new people, and this is my boundary for friends, and this is my boundary for best friends, and this is my boundary for family. So that makes it easier, and kind of lessen confusion and expectations of things around, and kind of being consistent with that. And holding your boundaries with everybody makes your life so much easier. I will say, kind of one of the things is kind of setting up, like, when are you going to let people know about your boundaries? Like, when are you going to let them know? How are you going to explain this? How are you going to explain this to other people? This can be a really great one. I will say that kind of like, you don't really have to go into why you're setting boundaries or why it's important to. It's one of those, just to know that you have boundaries. That's important for them to know at the beginning. And I'm one of those people that really, I love to talk, I love to share, but I'm very careful about what I do share with other people. I will tell you, really kind of one of the interesting ones is kind of dealing with kind of social media, because a lot of times people will say things on social media that they wouldn't say anywhere else. They wouldn't tell you that to your face, but they will say it on social media. So that's one of those, like, really interesting ones that is kind of interesting to deal with, is kind of like those boundaries. And I think we see that a lot. All the time. It's like they feel protected because they're not face to face with you, so they can say whatever they want, or kind of like hit you with that punchline or whatever else. And sometimes they'll just say things that are really mean, and they kind of are doing it because they're probably not happy in their life, and so they kind of like want to kind of spar with someone else. Communication is the best one, and kind of clearly communicating your boundaries, clearly communicating, like, your concerns if someone's getting too close to a boundary, letting them know, and then kind of being like your biggest, like, cheerleader, kind of like cheering yourself on as your boundaries change, as you change, as you put new ones up and change or modify the old ones. Like, it's okay for all of those. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to change your mind. That's the fun part. So make sure that you are changing those from time to time, if if the situation calls for that. So that's a really good one. And then kind of gain some perspective. If you see someone else that has some healthy boundaries, maybe asking them about theirs, or kind of like, what can I learn from someone else about healthy boundaries, and setting up that information for that person to kind of really like, oh, this is where this comes in, and this is what I require knowing or understanding at this point. That's kind of one of those, interesting. So healthy boundaries can be something that everybody requires, but I guarantee you some people are really not that great at it, and I will say usually that's your clairsensitives. Clairsensitives are usually pretty bad about setting healthy boundaries because they're such an open heart. They just want to share everything with everybody, but it really is important to set some healthy boundaries, not only for you, but your well-being as well. So let's pull some angel cards and get us a deeper insight into all things setting healthy boundaries. This one is the first card coming up. And this is the South Node, and this is the past. Usually in the past, we have had people that in our life that kind of would have like climbed all over a boundary. They would have been like, oh, I don't care for boundaries, or pushing the limit on boundaries. And so that's a really important statement. When we've done them in the past, if they didn't work, it means that we probably didn't set them up right to begin with. And so really setting that time to kind of like, what are my boundaries and where do I want to set those boundaries? The other one is kind of like a little side note, is if you set a boundary with someone and they keep kind of knocking on that boundary, kind of like keep pushing that boundary, a lot of times I will kind of give them a pretty harsh statement of kind of like, why are you pushing my boundaries? And then I'll just stop talking and let them fill in the blank. Because if someone's not honoring your boundary, they're not honoring you. And then where does that send this relationship? So it's kind of really important that you set those healthy boundaries to begin with, and really understand where other people are at on their boundaries. And a lot of people don't like boundaries, and you have to hold that line because it's important for you and your well-being and your health as well. This is Aries, and this is Act. If someone is not holding your boundary the way you choose for them to, then you need to act and you need to change. Don't expect them to change like, oh, well, you need to walk away from the friendship, or you need to walk away from this. Nope, you need to. Or you need to step back and say, I need to reassess my boundaries at this point, and so we need to stop this for now until I have time to look at this. And that can be a really healthy boundary, is being able to act on that. This is Aquarius, and this is collaborate. I will say collaborate on boundaries. If you have someone in your life that's really good at boundaries, let them help you set some healthy boundaries, and kind of setting that energy with them so that it makes life much easier and much more healthy. Let's see. This will be our last card, and this one's popping out from the middle. This is Libra, and this is about the balance. And it really is about balance. When you are setting some boundaries, it really does balance your life out, because you know exactly where everybody should be in your life, what boundary they're at, and if you're ready to kind of move that boundary or kind of move that back or forward, depending on what they've done in their lives, or kind of how they treat you in your life. That's a really great one. If someone is excessively hitting one of my boundaries, or kind of hits it a few times, I may kind of leave them at that boundary for a little bit longer until I feel secure of moving that boundary for them. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I know that we'll be talking again soon.